RealAg Live. And welcome to RealAg Live, everybody. Today it is the budget special. It's our first budget in 2 years, so why wouldn't we have a special? I'm your host today, co-host today, Shaun Haney of Real Agriculture, and also joined by my colleague, Kelvin Heppner. Hey, Kelvin, how are you?
Doing well here, Shaun. Certainly, yeah, it's been more than 2 years in the making since we've last been able to talk about a federal budget.
It is 700 pages long. It looks like a Ken Follett novel as they passed it. They almost needed like a pallet and a forklift to take it from Freeland's hands. Right off the top, before we bring in our panel, Kelvin, what are some of the things that really caught your eye?
Well, you mentioned 739 pages. I think that's almost how many days. Do you know exactly how many days it's been since the last one? I think it's right around that number.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's a coincidence or not, but the bottom line in the budget is a $354 billion deficit. Definitely a pre-election budget from a political standpoint, a strategic standpoint. Not a lot of holding back in terms of spending here. Maybe no holding back in terms of spending here. There's no plan in it to get back to balanced. I guess some of the highlights in terms of retail politics, there's a $10 a day childcare pledge for all Canadians by 2025. So they plan to cut fees in half to start. So that's, I believe, $30 billion going to childcare. $15 minimum wage is mentioned. Continuing COVID relief programs, the wage subsidy, the rent subsidy have been extended till fall. And then a whole whack of green net zero focus type programs, $5 billion over 7 years for a net zero accelerator, investing in technology and innovation that leads to net zero, launching a green bond program, several billion for home retrofits, including an interest-free loan program to help Canadians make their homes more energy efficient. And also in terms of the climate, there's a new greenhouse gas emissions target in this budget. Previously, Canada's been aiming for a 30% reduction by 2030 of 2005 levels, and they've raised that bar now to 36%, which I believe, I was a little surprised they made that announcement in the budget today. I thought that was going to come later in the week, or the rumor was that was going to come later in the week on Earth Day with that climate summit happening in the US, but a new higher emissions reduction target in the budget as well. So I don't know, what else stood out to you, Shaun? There's a few other, there's certainly lots in there.
Luxury tax on boats, planes, and automobiles over $100,000. That probably impacts some of our audience if they're looking to buy a new boat.
Hopefully combines are exempt.
Hopefully combines are exempt.
Yeah.
I think the big one that stood out to me is the child care. Cutting child care costs in half in a year. And then, of course, then making it basically a $10 cost per day for Canadians. It's modeled after the program in Quebec. They're obviously going to have to negotiate with the provinces, but we're going to talk about that with our panel in terms of how it doesn't solve all the issues that rural Canadians have, but getting childcare down to $10 a day, that's a massive item when it comes to the portion of this.
There are also a few agricultural tidbits in there. Much of the discussion and most of the budget is focused on broader and not necessarily specific to agriculture type things, but there is mention of the carbon tax on grain drying. So the province or the federal government says it will start sending out money, returning some of what farmers have paid for grain drying in the provinces where the federal backstop is in effect starting in 2021-22. They're estimating that at $100 million in the first year. So further details expected later this year from the Minister of Finance on that. So that's progress on something that farm groups, including Canadian Federation of Agriculture, have been lobbying for. And then there's hundreds of millions of dollars through several programs here. I haven't been able to keep up with all the names for these programs, but clean and climate related type Nature Smart Climate Solutions Fund, for example, is the name of a new $60 million fund. Or they're putting $60 million into this fund over 2 years to protect wetlands. And there's all kinds of things, $10 million to help farmers move off of using diesel. Funds like this. Also, processors in supply managed sectors are going to be in line for, I believe it's just under $300 million over the next 7 years, according to the budget. So some tidbits for agriculture, but maybe not necessarily any huge surprises or new directions here.
If you were looking for austerity, This wasn't the budget for you. Where oh where have any of the fiscal hawks gone? They are a fully endangered species when it comes to politics, not just in Canada, but a lot of countries around the world, including many of them in the G20. That deficit of 354. They made the comment on Power and Politics that the last budget, Canadians were freaking out about a deficit of $19 billion. And now we're talking about 354, just to put it all in perspective. Hey, Kelvin, should we bring in the panel?
Let's do it.
Okay, we've got a great panel assembled here. I want to get the reaction from farm groups. Now, remember, everybody, that this budget just came, at the time of the broadcast here, it just came out like 70 minutes ago. So our panelists have graciously volunteered to come on the show and provide their I guess, firsthand reaction, their immediate reaction. I'm sure a lot of these groups are going to be putting out their full analysis here over the coming days because, like Kelvin said, over 700 pages. There is a lot to break down and sift through. So let's bring in the panel. I'm going to do this like so. Just hold on here. Bring them all in. There we go. I got everybody. Perfect. Okay, let's run through and introduce everybody. Let's start off here and introduce first from Pulse Canada. It is Jeff English. He's their VP Marketing Communications. Hey, Jeff, how are you?
Good, Sean. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to chat with you. Also, we've got Chris Vandenheuvel. He is the second VP at the Canadian Federation of Agriculture. Chris, how are you doing?
I'm great, thanks, Sean. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and Chris, where are you based out of?
We're in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia.
Nice. See, real agriculture, coast to coast. We've also got here with us today Jennifer Babcock. She's the Senior Manager of Government Relations with the Canadian Cattlemen's Association. Jennifer, how are you?
Doing well, Sean. Happy to be here.
And based out of Calgary, correct?
I'm actually in the Ottawa office. I'm in the Ottawa bubble, really focused in, and sad there's no budget receptions to go to tonight.
Yeah,
exactly.
No lockup today. No lockup all day.
Yeah.
Or it was a virtual lockup, I think, that they had.
Yeah. There was stuff that's sort of sneaking out throughout the day, but I think everybody sort of seemed to abide pretty good by the lockup. Jennifer, let's start with you. What was your first reaction from the Canadian Cattlemen's Association perspective?
Yeah, sure. I guess first I have to say it was pretty cool to see the first female finance minister give the budget. So as far as that goes, it was a historic day. Obviously, we would have liked to see more references to agriculture. I think when we did a few searches, there were maybe 15 to 20 total in the budget of reference to the word agriculture. I did know. I mean, there's some things that are in there that we'll get into later on that. Interested, we want to be involved in the conversations. Obviously, environment continues to be a focus in the green economy, and we're seeing those trends continue from the fall economic statement we had. So not, like you said, not a lot of real surprises, but I did note that in one of the references to agriculture, when they're talking about some of the traditional sectors that have been the economic pillars of Canada, they did note that those are going to be the ones to bring us into this new sustainable economy as well. And so obviously we're on that same page there. So good to see that, but more could have been done, but it wasn't a complete shocker.
Chris, from the perspective of Canadian Federation of Agriculture, what do you see here?
Yeah, from our perspective, much the same as what Jen had just described. No real shockers. I mean, we're glad to see some of the references to agriculture in there. Of course, as Jen had mentioned, really heavy on the environmental aspect and climate change mitigation. And, we can get into some of those details. But we were pleased to see some references to some infrastructure improvements, some additional money in the broadband initiatives and things like that will, while they're not targeted specifically at agriculture, will undoubtedly help our membership.
No kidding. Rural broadband infrastructure needs to get better across the country, and not easy solutions. And just throwing money at it doesn't solve the problem either, but it's good to see that they're recognizing that there is an issue that needs to be dealt with. And Jeff, from your perspective at Pulse Canada, what do you see?
Yeah, I think no real surprises for us or for our members. It's a lengthy document. I think you each mentioned that. It might be easier to call attention to what words aren't in the budget versus what words are, because it's going to take some time to go through. And certainly from a policy standpoint, our guys are doing that. I think, much like Jennifer and Chris have mentioned, a heavy focus on the environment and agriculture, and specifically we feel the pulse sector as well well positioned to factor into some of those conversations. But I mean, this budget's a political document. We'll have to take a look and see kind of the practical applications of a lot of these new spending features.
And there is spending. There's no shortage of that. The money is now growing on trees in Canada. Kelvin, do you have a question for the panel?
Well, I guess, Jeff, you mentioned Pulse is fitting into some of the potential climate and green economy type narrative here with some of these programs. Jennifer, from your perspective, grasslands, of course, certainly the CCA is investing and really wants to make sure that people know about the environmental benefits of rotational grazing and all those types of things. Do you think there's going to be a place for that in where the federal government is headed here?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was something that we noted in our pre-budget submission as well, that as the environment policies and programs move forward, that producers need to be in the development of those policies. And I noted with the Nature Smart Climate Solutions Fund was one of them. They have $60 million over the next 2 years. That's targeting the protection of existing wetlands and trees on farms. And we've been recommending starting ecosystem services like this for a long time. This is one of them. Of course, you mentioned grasslands. That needs to be added into this as well. So that's something that we'll be discussing about. Rotational grazing was actually mentioned in the budget once, so good to see that, but more to be done. And I think it's all in the details, and the details are not yet decided. So I think we'll all be involved in those discussions as they continue forward.
Question here from Richard. I'll throw it out there to if anybody saw it. Is there any incentives for biodiesel development for new plants? Of course, the Clean Fuel Standard, big part of the government's federal climate plan. But was there any terms of incentive there for plant building? Do you see anything, Kelvin?
Well, I think some of that would be under this more general net zero type programming, where they have this new investment fund for any technology that moves us towards net zero. So I think biofuels, renewable diesel, that type of thing, they would probably say, and I believe here I just searched biofuel and biodiesel in the document, and it comes up under those types of programs here. So it's mentioned as something that could potentially benefit from some of these net zero type focused programs, but in many ways, like Jennifer just mentioned, there isn't necessarily much detail here. So a lot of the actual place where we see the rubber hit the road with this budget will come down to those details.
Well, and we're going to get some of those details from the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food, Marie-Claude Bebeau. She will be on Friday's RealAg radio show to talk about some of the things coming out of this budget for agriculture. So that's on Friday's radio show that, of course, you can listen to on Rural Radio 147, or, of course, download the podcast. Chris, any concern about the $15 minimum wage that they're now talking about? Are we going to hear some squeals out of agriculture on that one?
I'm sorry, ironically, my broadband issue kicked up there. I heard.
Do you think that we're going to hear any pushback from agriculture groups, maybe including yourselves, about the $15 minimum wage? Is that something that the industry is going to squeal about a little bit?
Well, we'll have to investigate that, obviously, with our partners. I think any time that we see northwards pressures of cost like that affect us, I mean, ultimately, our industry is our price takers, and it's often difficult to pass along cost increases like that, whether it's wage increases or input costs or whatever the case might be. It is difficult for us to pass those costs on. So. Yeah, we'll have to wait and see and talk to the team and figure out what our stance is going to be.
Well, and go ahead, Kelvin.
I was just going to say, is that as close as they came to? There was a lot of discussion about a universal basic income leading up to this budget. I don't believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I haven't seen anything about that in there. And I guess a $15 minimum wage might be the Liberals' response to that type of effort or advocacy. Sorry, not asking any question in particular. Just
Jeff,
commenting.
do you want to take that?
Yeah, well, I think that the idea of a universal basic income has been touted around, and I think you're seeing in this budget a lot of spending on the priorities that they have put forward in the months lead up to this. So whether it's back to the fall economic statement, or there've been a lot of nothing in here that is coming way out of left field that they haven't already been proactively communicating on. In terms of the the wage, $15 minimum wage. I'd need to take a deeper dive to see if that's just talking about federally regulated institutes or whether or not that's going to get onto a provincial specific level. I'd note that a lot of the provinces that we're talking about throughout the country already have this, and in many ways, this could just be the federal government matching what most provinces have done. So we'd have to take a look to probably answer further.
And taking credit. That's politics. Like that's how the game is played. But
but it's a budget. It's a political document, as I say, Sean. And so there's no lack of poetry found in over the 700 pages, and that's not unique to this government. Certainly, it's well played across all sides of the aisle.
Yeah, for sure. Jennifer, when you see so much of this budget, obviously COVID interwoven all through it, but climate initiatives as well. From the cattle perspective, where do you sit on that? Is that an opportunity in trying to figure out, okay, where do we fit into this? Or is there pushback on some of the things in terms of how it impacts the industry? How does CCA handle that?
Yeah, it's two sides of the same coin with the opportunity and challenges that can come with that. They have so much on the climate that I couldn't possibly reference it all in our time we have here. But when they talk about conserving 25% of our lands and oceans by 2025, we see that as a really positive thing towards the grasslands. There's a lot of the titles and just the way that they're talking about helping farmers with climate solutions, that can be really positive for farmers and ranchers across Canada. It comes down to which stakeholders are going to be in the room when these policies are developed and the programs are developed, and how do we make sure that it's fair and is based on science too, and based on how we can all work together collectively. We all represent different commodities, and there's ways for these programs to be effective for all of us, I think.
Yeah, I would add to that, Sean. The opportunity for agriculture, with this government is certainly through the climate door, and it's not for one portion of agriculture versus the other. Like, this is a collective opportunity, and so, we're cognizant, certainly on the pulse side of things, that there are places where I can tell you it makes a ton of sense to grow lentils, and there are places where it makes a ton of sense to have cattle grazing, and I don't want this to get into a debate, certainly from an agricultural perspective, over, well, it's this sector versus that sector. There's an opportunity for Canadian agriculture here, as Jennifer rightly points out. It's in getting around those tables where the conversations are happening to know that the industry is being represented, because as we've seen, for the government to invest this much money into this funding envelope, we'll call it, agriculture absolutely has to be there. And I think a lot of their climate targets are based on agriculture being a willing component and continuing to punch above its weight in terms of feeding people while at the same time mitigating our impact on the climate.
Well, go ahead, Jennifer.
Sorry, I was going to say on the food side, there was a lot about food in this budget, and how the government had helped with the food supply in the past year with COVID and working with industry to make sure that there's the food supply. But it also goes forward looking, and if you want food, you need the other side on the production for agriculture. So, I mean, you mentioned the green bond earlier. This could be great for investment in agriculture. We just want to make sure that we're able to qualify for this.
Well, go ahead, Chris. Go ahead.
It is a double-edged sword for our industry. A lot of these initiatives are ultimately going to end up costing us as an industry on one hand, but there is a tremendous opportunity. And I think the point that both Jen and Jeff made about us as stakeholders being around the table when the details of these programs are developed and rolled out, I think that's going to be absolutely key for us, and that the government really takes a sound scientific approach to how they develop and roll these programs out.
Because I think the climate file, Chris, is something that the CFA has a really broad membership. So you're already, the tent's pretty big from that aspect. But in terms of working with a number of different associations across the country, the climate file really feels like something that everybody can kind of get their head wrapped around together and try to do the lobbying on the points that need to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we do have a very diverse membership, across commodities, from coast to coast to coast. As a sector overall, I mean, we are truly one of the only ones in Canada that do go from clear across, east to west and north to south. And on some hands, it makes it difficult from that lobbying perspective. But on other hands, I think especially around climate change, that's something that we can all agree on, that we all have to do our part, and that agriculture can play a tremendous role, and that there is an opportunity for us there if the policies that are put in place make sense for us to participate.
One of the points that stuck out to me, Kelvin, was $101 million over 2 years starting in 22-23 to have AFC implement a program for the wine sector that will support wineries in adapting to ongoing and emerging challenges. Whew, thank goodness. I can 100% get behind that one, Kelvin.
I think this has something to do with trade deals as well, and some of the issues there on the trade front when it comes to Canada's wine industry. So, yeah, it's some specific support there. I don't know enough background on the issues the wine sector is facing, but
it goes back to the USMCA. It goes back to the USMCA.
Some of that, yeah, similar to the supply managed sector compensation, probably in some ways. Yep. I did find some more info here on the minimum wage. It's $15 minimum wage for federally regulated sectors or industries. So that isn't necessarily across the spectrum. That's places like banks, grain elevators, things that are regulated under the Canadian Grain Commission, I guess, would apply to that. So the budget, I think, refers to affecting 26,000 Canadians who currently make less than $15 per hour in the federally regulated private sector. So,
that not well, because you and I, Kelvin, we talked about this prior to going on the air, and the way that they were talking about it on CBC on the panel, that's interesting that's what the details are, because they didn't give that impression. That's
the thing with the budget. It's often you get the headlines coming out of it or whatever is running on the ticker at the bottom of the news channel, the cable news channel, and it's we'll see. Like Jeff already mentioned, quite a few provinces are already moving in this direction towards a $15 minimum wage. So, but that could, I'm not sure at the farm level that makes a huge difference, but potentially in other parts of the supply chain, if they are paying less than that, that could result in higher food costs or higher input costs, effects that way, indirect effects.
So Jeff, how much are we going to be talking about here? There's obviously a lot of focus on the spending because it makes up a good portion of this. But do you think we're going to hear much about the fact the deficit has grown to the level that it has from a general standpoint? I think if we think about the agriculture audience, most of them are fiscal conservatives. We want to put it that way. We're going to hear a lot about the deficit. I think, are we not?
You would expect to, but I think it'll be an interesting question for opposition parties to see to what extent are they going to push against that. Obviously, the government feels that they have a little bit of leeway or a mandate to start implementing some of these priorities. I mean, Canada has certainly been one of the biggest, if not the biggest spender in the G7 per capita, as we've seen ourselves through up to this point in the pandemic. The government, not missing an opportunity to further the spending here. I think, from an agriculture perspective, where we're kind of looking and focused is, as we said, the budget is a bit of a priority and policy document, but a lot of what they're talking about here is going to require further consultation, is going to require implementation. And so where are the areas where our priorities are aligned? And let's focus on that and make sure that members and that Canadian agriculture are being well represented. And in terms of deficit reduction and kind of a plan to get back to balance, those are not the conversations, I think, quite frankly, that whether or not you or I are having them around our dinner tables is not really where the government has staked its claim on. They're going to, obviously, as you've seen by this, go all in on spending, and I think that they're probably going to find some support, or they feel that they're going to find enough support from one of the other parties to get this going. In terms of where else we can find outside of the environment and climate, it was interesting to note some spending priorities in terms of infrastructure, something of importance to farmers, and in terms of National Trade Corridor Fund and some expansion programs that say specific ports have taken advantage of. I know from a Pulse Canada perspective, we'll be wanting a little bit more details and things like that. And regulatory reform, we were probably hoping to see a little bit more. But as we say, like this is a signals check. So I think what I'm taking away from the government, and I think what members would want to take, and your listeners would want to take away from the government, is these are the things they want to talk about. If you're engaging with them, if you're coming for a meeting, if you have an idea, it best check or at least fit into one of these boxes. Otherwise, it's going to be a little tough slogging. So I think as an industry, we got to look for those areas of mutual benefit and come to the table with some ideas and some solutions that are going to advance the needs of Canadian agriculture, while at the same time be on the same level of what the government wants to hear.
On the childcare portion of this, which is going to get a lot of discussion in the mainstream, but this is an agricultural issue for sure as well for rural Canadians. $30 billion over 5 years to create a national childcare program. It's eventually going to bring by 2025 child care cost down to $10 per day. That's substantial. Some people are paying, $50, $60 a day. This is makes a big difference when you add it up, whether somebody goes back to work or not. Jennifer, when I think about this from a rural standpoint, this doesn't solve the issue. I'm not saying I suggest the government solve this issue, but there's a lot of Canadians that don't have access to, say, to child care. That, never mind what the cost of it is. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. And I'm not an expert in this policy file. I'm a Canadian who appreciates cheaper childcare, but it is that access, whether you're in rural Canada or downtown Toronto, and that's something that I don't believe that they have addressed yet. And I'm not sure actually how this plays in with the province too, to get multiple jurisdictions involved, if it's a national program or if they do have to work with the individual provinces similarly on the education front.
Yeah, well, the federal government and the provinces get along so well. But
that is a good point. It could be. It will likely be money, from how I understand it, it'll be money directed to the provinces with the criteria that it goes towards childcare, and we'll have to see whether the provinces play ball on that. I guess if the dollar figure is significant enough, they likely will, but in addressing that issue of actual supply of childcare spaces, I think they have to use this money to increase the supply. That's the way you bring prices down in terms of economic theory. So they need to make more spaces if this is going to work. And hopefully that includes investing in spaces in rural communities where it's accessible by agriculture and rural families as well.
Any final questions, Kelvin?
I was going to ask, sorry, now I forget what I was going to say. Chris was talking before about the cost side of a lot of these this green initiatives, these climate-focused programs that the government is moving ahead on, including, of course, the carbon tax is the most obvious one. How do you feel agriculture is positioned in terms of being able to take advantage of some of these opportunities to offset the increased costs that we are likely going to see, or we are already seeing on our farms and our costs? Directed at you, Chris, to start.
Yeah, there's no doubt that we, that we are in a position to be able to help on the climate change mitigation front. This was mentioned a couple of times in the conversation. Jen mentioning the grassland initiatives and rotational grazing and things like that. I mean, with some investments and some opportunities there for us to take advantage of that, and to get recognized for what we've done already and what we're going to be able to do in the future. And I think it's going to take a real sit-down conversation between the government and between our industries to help flesh out those types of things and help. We can help the government understand from our perspective what we can do from carbon sequestration and all these types of things with our grasslands. Good to see in the budget some money's put towards on-farm energy initiatives and these types of things. So there is a tremendous opportunity for us there. But as we've said all along, I guess the devil is in the details. So.
And I think farmers politically, we would rather not rely on government for our income. So that's where I think some of this isn't naturally what farm groups are necessarily lobbying for. I don't know, Jeff and Jen, maybe if you want to add to that as well.
Well, I would say, as an industry, we've have been advocating, and our members have been advocating for some sort of rectification to the issue of grain drying, and certainly those who are paying into the carbon tax is something that we saw as an unintended consequence. As much as what was said in this budget, I think it's very clear what wasn't said. So there is no grain drying specific exemption. I take this as a door closed on that initiative. In fact, there's millions of dollars going into enhancing grain drying technology to find more efficient models. But I take that as a hard no from the federal government. I do see that they're going to be redistributing some costs, as we said, to some of the largest agricultural provinces. But they didn't really provide details as of yet of what that would look like or how one would qualify. So that is something we'll be seeking clarity on behalf of our members. The issue of carbon sequestration, which has come up a lot, certainly amongst our members, amongst all of our common membership on this panel, was not something that was explicitly named or mentioned. Certainly moving toward more environmentally friendly solutions, but nothing related to what's already being done. And my belief is that is done with intent, Kelvin. I think that's a signal from the government of coming to the table with new ideas, not looking to get credit for what's already been out there. I know that our membership will want to discuss that and chart a plan forward, and I expect to be talking more about it in the coming weeks and months.
Jen, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think we're pretty similar aligned there with what Jeff just said. I mean, farmers and ranchers were major players in Canada's fight against climate change, and I think it's more going in there and getting recognition for that. Whether it's not just to go in there to ask for money, but just for when the policies are developed, that we're able to help meet those goals. And you mentioned this new GHG target that's come out through this, so they're going to need partners to get this done. And I think that farmers, ranchers were well positioned to do this.
Yeah,
and the government says right in the document that with the $100 million rebate this year, and the price is going to go up, so the rebate will be more fulsome in years ahead. I don't think that's a signal to expect that farmers are getting rebated more without putting in more. I think it's something very clear that their intent on that they have the mandate to do this from Canadians, and that's where they're focused. And I think it's incumbent on us, and certainly on us and who work on behalf of your members, Shaun, to get to work to put together some ideas and some solutions that can proactively address these challenges and be around the table and part of those conversations.
Jeff Nielsen watching on Facebook says $50 million for more efficient grain dryers. Can't be much more efficient than they are now. So a little bit of skepticism out there in the audience in terms of what we're doing here. But Kelvin, you mentioned diesel fuel, reduction of diesel fuel use.
Yeah, I believe there was, it's $10 million over 2 years. This is from that agricultural clean technology program that they've already been running towards powering farms with clean energy and moving off of diesel. So certainly looking for they're putting money into all the different ways of reducing reliance on traditional fuels. So
yeah,
there is one other point I was going to raise here, Shaun, is that the government has made it its policy to also do a gender-based analysis on its policies. And so that was something I definitely noticed in this budget document, is that there is some references to the impact and who benefits from these programs. And certainly some of these agricultural programs, it specifically or explicitly says this program will generally benefit older men, things like that, which I'm not sure if that is something that the agricultural community would agree with, first of all, and second of all, will be beneficial for agriculture in the long term. So yeah, it's the direct beneficiaries of these measures are older men, since 71% of operators in the agriculture sector are men, an average certain age. So I don't think that's maybe that ties in kind of with what Jeff was alluding at here in terms of how this government sees agriculture in this, and hopefully our farm groups and the agriculture community can find a way to tell or to show this government how agriculture can play this role.
Okay, Chris, I'll ask you, do you what's your guess? And I'm not going to hold you to it, of course, but I'm just interested. Do you think that is this an election document? What do you think we're going to have? Are we going to have an election?
That's a great question. That's a tough one to answer. Indications from some of the opposition parties are that no, that they're not going to hold the government to task. But when you look at what the government has announced in this document, it does very much look like a spend document and getting ready for that election process. So I guess the next couple of days and weeks will tell.
Any other takers on that one?
Definitely.
I made the mistake last year of saying that we'd have an election this spring, and based on Ontario being in a stay-at-home order right now, I'm not thinking that is as likely. So I think it is an election document, but I don't know if we're going so quickly as spring.
Yeah, BC, I just saw is like going into like telling people not to leave their health region. So there's issues across the country. Jeff, go ahead.
Well, I mean, it certainly ought to be, because there's a lot of priorities in here. I think that the government, by its own admission, would say this is not the plan we took to Canadians a year and a half ago. And I mean, how could it be with kind of the COVID and pandemic and what's all come out of that? So they would certainly be justified in making it an election budget, at least in my opinion. I don't think that there's enough consensus amongst the opposition parties to vote it down. I think if you're the Liberals, you're absolutely trying to trigger one, or at least I certainly would be, because things are looking quite favorable for them. So unless they can figure out a way to find general discord, or perhaps pay our interim Governor General, Chief Justice Wagner, a visit and call one just saying that they hadn't received a mandate to do this, we're likely to see it pass. But that doesn't that certainly never precludes the government from asking for a renewed mandate from the people. And I think by and large, if they did so, and it looks like it was done today, they would receive one from Canadians. So,
and the precedent has been set now. We can call it a pre-election budget, even if the election is only in 2 years. So
it's true. What is the line on the over/under when we get the next budget?
Well, this was only the second budget we've had since the last election. I believe we've only Bill Morneau's budget was so.
Oh, well. Lindsay and Jim both agreeing that it's likely to get kicked down the road. Panelists, thank you so much for joining us here today. This is a lot of fun. I know we've kind of put you on the spot. It just came out now about an hour and a half ago. I do greatly appreciate everybody joining us here today, and really, really appreciate it. Jeff, English, Pulse Canada, thank you so much.
Thanks, Sean.
Chris, thank you so much for joining us and giving us Canadian Federation of Agriculture's perspective.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Great stuff. And Jennifer, thank you so much. Always great to hear from our friends in the cattle industry.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Okay, Kelvin, any final thoughts?
I think we've summed it up as much as we can for this point, or at this point. Definitely a focus on spending and on childcare, climate, reducing emissions. Certainly the priorities we've seen from the federal government in the past, but with the dollar figure at an exponential increase in terms of what the deficit looks like. Absolutely.
Hey, really appreciate everybody joining us out there. Great analysis from our panelists. Appreciate Kelvin taking some time today as well to join me here. This was a lot of fun on big news days. We love doing these live broadcasts with a panel of farm groups and experts, and really, really appreciate it, because we think it really, really is something that agriculture is kind of missing. There's not you don't get this kind of stuff. You tune into CTV and CBC, and they don't talk about agriculture, so we want to provide that kind of service to you. So we thank everybody, wherever you are in Canada, for joining us here today. Really do appreciate it. Thank you so much for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Live, and we'll chat again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.